So at this time, I will introduce our speaker. We have Dr. Stephen Hussey. He's a chiropractor and functional medicine practitioner. He attained both of his degrees, a doctorate of chiropractic and master in science in human nutrition and functional medicine from the University of Western States in Portland, Oregon. He's a health coach, speaker, and author of 2 books on health, The Health Evolution, Why Understanding Evolution is the Key to Vibrant Health, and Understanding the Heart, Surprising Insights into the Evolutionary Origins of Heart Disease and Why It Matters. Dr. Hussey guides clients from around the world back to health using the latest research and health-attaining strategies. He spoke a couple years at the conference and it was phenomenal, so I'm sure he'll have just as good of a talk this year. And if you've been in this room before, you know we like to do the little fun fact or interesting fact. And his interesting fact is that he was forced to leave a foreign country. So he was 2 years in Ireland and was asked to leave, not by will. So please help me welcome Dr. Hussey.
Everybody wants to know. It was just my visa ran out, and they said no. There was apparently too many chiropractors in Ireland, and I was taking someone's job. So, yeah, they kicked me out. But I was there legally for 6 months. Yeah, so they flagged my passport, and I couldn't come back for a year after that. Sorry. I have to get used to being close to this thing. I'm Dr. Stephen Hussey. We're going to talk about heart disease. Mainly because it's a personal interest of mine because of my personal health history, which we're going to talk about. But knowing the stuff that I know and the different view I have of cardiovascular health, it led me into understanding some of the things that happen, some of the adverse events we saw with the COVID injection and with COVID in general, but especially with the injections. Let's get started. I have a lot to share, so let's get started. So first, a little about me. I grew up in Western North Carolina. I had lots of chronic disease issues as a kid, everything from irritable bowel syndrome. I used to break out in hives all over my body, and they couldn't tell me why. I had asthma and allergies, lots of different things. The doctors would just give me prednisone or allergy medications or whatever, just trying to suppress the symptoms. No discussion of ever what was going on, and my parents were just kind of relying on Western medicine to help us manage, but not understand those conditions. I went to college in Asheville, got my degree in health and wellness promotion, and it was during college that I started to figure out that I could live my life a certain way and affect those conditions. And got rid of most of them, aside from type 1 diabetes, which I was diagnosed with at age 9, which is kind of collateral damage from that inflammation. But I thought it interesting at that time that no doctor ever told me I could change my lifestyle and affect those conditions and get rid of them. So that kind of, pushed me in one direction as far as health goes. I got my chiropractic degree at the University of Western States and got a human nutrition and functional medicine degree there as well. I practiced chiropractic it's almost 12 years now. Practiced in Ireland, South Carolina, and I've been in Virginia in the last 7 years. In addition to chiropractic, I do online health consulting, clients all over the world, speaking, obviously. And I've written 3 books, actually. The last one came out a couple months ago, and there they are right there. And there's a picture of Ireland there. It's just green, and there's sheep and castles. That's pretty much it. But it's beautiful. So, ever since that time in college, I've always been very health conscious, right? I found out that I could control a lot of, my body's presentation of health. So I always ate a whole foods diet, exercised regularly, avoided toxin exposure, and managed my blood sugars very well as a type 1. I didn't do so well in high school. I was kind of a defiant teenager. But then once I got wind of this stuff, I managed my blood sugars very well. A1C's always low for a type 1 diabetic. And then, upon the request of a nurse practitioner, in June 2020, June 16, 2020, I got a CAC score, which is a measurement of how much calcified plaque there is in the arteries of your heart. And my score came back perfect, 0. So, I'm thinking it's only hard plaque. It's not measuring soft plaque. But these scores have been shown to be a very good predictor of cardiovascular risk of an event. Mine was 0, so very good indication there was low risk. So I was pretty happy with that. But despite that, 6 months later, I had a massive heart attack. I had a widowmaker heart attack. You can see the clot right there. And I know what you're all thinking based on the title of this talk. But I never had a COVID injection. Not something that I'm into. And surprisingly, the CAC score showed there was no hard plaque, but when they did the angiogram to bust the clot and place a stent, they found no soft plaque either, just a spontaneous clot that formed in the left anterior descending artery that caused my heart attack. And it was just acute, worst pain in my life, right there in my chest. No pain down the arm, no pain in my head or anything like that. But it was unmistakable. I've heard people like, oh, I was walking around, I felt weird for a few days, I went in, they said I had a heart attack. This was not like that. It was very much like, okay, something's wrong. So there I was in the hospital, pretty, demoralized, pretty low self-esteem at that point, thinking I was taking care of myself and all these things, and this happened. And so, that left me with some damage to the septum of my heart, which is the muscle between the two ventricles. And so that damage resulted in my ejection fraction, the amount of blood leaving my heart, which is supposed to be 50 to 70%, at about 35 to 40%. And then also the signal of conduction through the muscles in my heart had dropped. It was severely hypokinetic. So the signal was not conducting through my heart to contract. So I had some heart damage acutely. This test was the day after the heart attack. And then a few months later, about 2 months later, I started becoming more active again, and I was just doing some walking, and I realized that I was having severe pain in my lower right leg. And at first I was like, what is this, like a DVT? Is it compartment syndrome? What's going on? And eventually, got some testing done. This testing was in July. Probably, so this was, almost 6 months later after the heart attack. I finally went in and got some testing because this leg hurt. And I developed atherosclerosis in the artery of my lower thigh that was constricting the blood flow to my lower leg. And I found that was because of the device they used to place the stent. So they went in through the artery in my groin to place the stent, and the device they used to seal up the artery afterwards restricted blood flow. It changed the blood flow dynamics going into my leg, and the blood pooled up right there, clotting tissue formed, and I developed atherosclerosis. But I want you to remember that it was a blood flow issue, okay? So anyways, I got the testing, and there was a 70 to 99% blockage of the artery in my leg. And I couldn't walk fast to the airport, I couldn't play soccer, couldn't snowboard, couldn't hike, couldn't do things like that without pain. I could kind of push through it, but it was not comfortable. So that's where that left me. And when I asked the doctors in the hospital why this happened, this is the answer I got, like a broken record. Every intern, every resident, every attending physician that came in, this was the answer. Your cholesterol is high. And it was. It was quite high, actually. And I knew that. And I'm going to explain why it was high here in a minute. But I had these numbers, total cholesterol of 442, LDL cholesterol of 372. And this is one of the higher tests that I had like before the heart attack, but always in the context of very low inflammation. C-reactive protein 0.8, homocysteine 6.9, very low inflammation. So before we go on with that story and talk about what happened to me and what I've done since, this crowd's probably pretty familiar with how the theory that cholesterol became, the main cause of heart disease came about. With this guy here, Ansel Keys, and how he came up with this, I would say, not quite fraudulent, but very poorly done research, where he did a 6-country study and a 7-country study, where he just, basically looked at the amounts of cholesterol and saturated fat people ate, and then looked at how much heart disease they had, but he cherry-picked the data. He only chose the 6 countries that gave him the correlation that he wanted, and then later 2 statisticians repeated the study with all 22 countries that had that data available at the time, which was like the 1950s, and they found no correlation whatsoever. And there's a whole long history of this heart disease cholesterol theory, lipid hypothesis, that has been pretty clearly debunked. So I'm not going to go into that a lot because there's way more important things to cover. But Western Enterprise Foundation is a very good resource for finding out that information. I do want to say, just show you, this is a bunch of studies. They're just associational studies, which can't prove causation. But these are all studies that show that having higher cholesterol leads to higher cognitive abilities, less heart disease, less cancer, less rates of infections, and lowest all-cause mortality. Again, they're just associations. We can't say that the high cholesterol caused those outcomes, but just as much as there's associational studies that show that it does cause disease, there's just as many that don't. So we can't really rely on that information. But you'll see today that it's largely irrelevant what your cholesterol is. Like this study here says, the idea that high cholesterol levels in the blood are the main cause of cardiovascular disease is impossible because people with low levels become just as atherosclerotic as people with high levels. And their risk of suffering from cardiovascular disease is the same or higher. So why was my cholesterol so high? So there's these new ideas coming out of the group of, from these authors here, Nick Norwitz and Dave Feldman, and Matthew Budoff. They've done a lot of this work, and they're basically showing that what your lipids are only tells us what you're metabolizing at the time. So lipids in the blood, lipoproteins, are just delivering fats, cholesterol and fats to tissues. So if you go on a low carbohydrate diet and you restrict the carbohydrates, you restrict the glucose, then the body has to deliver more fats to tissues because that's the only fuel source you have. And so the LDL goes up to deliver more to the tissues. And then if you eat more carbohydrates, your body will burn the carbohydrates and doesn't need to deliver as much fat, and the LDL will come down. And so that's what this lipid energy model is that's been published, this theory. And then this study is actually really funny. It's just a one-person experiment. And this guy is what they're calling a lean mass hyperresponder. Somebody goes on a low-carb diet and they see elevated LDL levels like mine. And what this guy did was he went on his low-carb diet and his LDL went up like he expected, like he usually sees. And then what he did was I think it was like he ate 12 Oreos a day for like 6 days or something like that. And his LDL came down dramatically. And then he went off the Oreos and he went back on his low-carb diet. His LDL went back up. And he took statins for 6 days. And the Oreos worked better. So I hope that the cardiologists don't catch wind of that and start recommending Oreos. So I don't recommend that. But these high LDL levels tend to occur in the context of very low cardiometabolic risk, and that's what these studies find. Just like me, I had very high LDL because a low-carb diet is very easy to manage type 1 diabetes on. But it's always in the context of that low inflammation, low cardiometabolic risk. And that was the case with me. I had no atherosclerosis anywhere in my arteries of my heart. So why did this clot happen? And this is just preliminary data from the latest studies of these people, because everybody wants to talk about, it's the oxidized LDL, the ApoB particles, the small dense particles. They want to analyze all that stuff. And so they're studying lean mass hyperresponders, these people with elevated LDL, and all these subfractions of LDL. And basically, this is preliminary data. It'll be published next month. But basically, they're finding that there's no correlation to any of these numbers. Small dense particles, ApoB, none of them matter as far as the total plaque burden of plaque in the arteries. So this world of measuring lipids, biochemistry in the blood, doesn't really tell us much as far as risk of cardiovascular disease. And there's lots of evidence for that. So I knew that prior to my heart attack, and I rejected this model. I rejected this theory. And so I thought, I was doing good. But to reject one paradigm without simultaneously substituting another is to reject science itself, says Thomas Kuhn. So maybe my mistake was that I didn't replace it with something else. And so I've looked further into it, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. So what happens in atherosclerosis, heart attacks, and strokes? I think in heart attacks and strokes, we can all agree that it's a clot at the end of the day, right? The end game is a clot. And it turns out that atherosclerosis is the same thing. It's not made up of lipids. There are many studies that have analyzed what atherosclerosis is. This study here finds that it's 87% plus or minus 8%, so sometimes up to 94%, 95% clotting tissue, fibrous clotting tissue, the same tissue that forms if you cut your skin and the scab forms, right? Stop the bleeding. Then there's some calcific deposits, some pultaceous debris, which is fun to say, and foam cells, which are just byproducts of an inflammatory response, okay? There are tons of studies out there talking about how fibrinogen or clotting material plays a role in every single aspect of plaque formation. Because I've been told by people that, oh, well, at first it's the cholesterol, but then the clotting material comes in later and fills in the gaps and things. And these studies show that it's literally there from the beginning. Fibrotic clotting tissue is what happens from the beginning. This study here says it right in the title. Platelets modulate atherogenesis, platelets being clotting factors in the blood, and progression of atherosclerotic plaque. So not cholesterol, platelets. This is a fascinating paper that I recommend anybody read if they're interested, called The Myth of the Vulnerable Plaque. And it basically talks about how these stenoses in coronary arteries, these narrowing of arteries, are not what cause heart attacks. And they say that, and treating the stenoses with an elective stent treatment or a bypass surgery don't prevent heart attacks. And I've looked at tons of research. I can't find any research that shows that they do, because the stenosis is not where the heart attack happens. And they argue that we should be instead focusing on how we assess clotting and how we mitigate clotting risk. That's their argument. And then this guy, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick from the UK, he wrote this paper. He also wrote a book called The Clot Thickens, making the argument that this is clotting tissue. So sounding like a broken record at this point. We got to fix clotting. Now, these are studies in people who have familial hypercholesterolemia, which is genetically high cholesterol. People who are lean mass hyperresponders are mistaken for being FH. And so in these people, they looked at their risk of developing atherosclerosis, thinking, they would all get atherosclerosis. But some of them did, and some of them didn't. So it can't be the high LDL or the high lipoproteins, because if some did and some didn't, you can't say that was the cause. But what they found, like in this study here, you can see here that the lipids, right here, there was very little difference between having cardiovascular disease and not having it. Very small, like unstatistically significant there. And then triglycerides made a little bit of a difference, but that's because if you have elevated triglycerides, it suggests insulin resistance, poor metabolic health. But the main factor that showed the difference between who got cardiovascular disease and who didn't was a genetic predisposition to a clotting factor, prothrombin. And these studies study different ones, factor VIII, fibrinogen, lots of different genetic predisposition to clotting, okay? So why does the body initiate clots? You cut your skin, your body doesn't want to bleed, needs to stop the bleeding. And so the same thing can happen in the artery. We can get damage to the lining of an artery, and if that damage persists and the artery gets more and more damaged, that artery could rupture, and then you're internally bleeding, which is a bigger problem. So what does the body do? If it can't heal the artery in a timely fashion, or what's damaging it is so heavy that it overwhelms those repair mechanisms, then it has to do something else, and that is deposit clotting tissue to stop that from happening. And that is what plaque is. So way back in 1856, this guy named Rudolf Virchow found that the things that cause clotting or predispose us to clotting are endothelial damage, hypercoagulability when the blood becomes sticky, and hemodynamic changes, so changes in blood flow, poor or stagnant blood flow. So all of these things here are things that have been linked to damage to the lining of an artery. So mainly the 9 over here are things that can damage the artery. So, high processed food diet, fluctuating blood sugars, so blood sugars that are spiking and dropping really fast, damage to things from high glucose in the blood, oxidized fat, so this is the seed oils becoming oxidized, endotoxemia, poor gut or dental health can lead to gram-negative bacteria in the bloodstream, and that causes damage. Psychological stress can lead to inflammation of the artery, heavy metals, air pollution, BPA, plastics, but all plasticizers, BPS, everything. And then these over here are things that interfere with the ability of the artery to heal itself once the damage has happened. So disrupted circadian rhythm, decreased endothelial progenitor cells, which are made in the bone marrow, and these are cells that can stimulate the healing of the artery, and then insulin resistance or leptin resistance, which is poor metabolic health, which is the precursor to diabetes type 2. So this is just studies showing that erythrocyte sedimentation rate, which I talked about a little bit in the panel last night, which is a measure of how readily your blood cells clump together once they're taken out of the bloodstream. And their ability to do that, you're going to understand that a little better, but the more readily or the faster they clump together seems to be a good indication of clotting risk, because that's hypercoagulability. Things are sticking together too much. but not just atherosclerosis, heart attacks, strokes, even heart failure. This is a good predictor of that. And then I like this study here that calls the amount of time the blood stays in a certain place in an artery as residence time. And so basically how well the blood is moving dictates or is a very good indicator of clotting risk. And so here it says, like, they talk about shear stress on an artery, like blood flowing past an artery and creating shear stress. It says that the residence time is way more predictive than shear stress. And so also in arrhythmias, hemodynamics are changed, and that's the risk with an arrhythmia is a clotting risk, right? Because the hemodynamics are changed, but it's all pointing to blood flow, right? And blood flow abnormalities. So it's the difference between a river that's flowing. You look at a river, it's always beautiful. It's flowing down nicely, but a puddle can get dirty. It's stagnant water. So it's the difference there. There's plenty of studies like this too, which, it just shocks me that the field of cardiology is so focused on the lipids when there's studies like this out here that just basically summarize the evidence saying that this is a clotting disease, and it has to do with blood viscosity and blood flow issues. These studies state this over and over again. So this world tells us nothing about risk of clotting. Like I told you, it just kind of tells us about metabolism and what we're metabolizing at the time. There's no instance in my mind I can think of where the lipid just says, you know what, I'm going to go damage the artery today because I feel like it. It just doesn't happen. So we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. So Ansel Keys came up with this idea, cholesterol causes heart disease, measuring lipids is the answer. And we have a lot of people out there that are just obsessed with measuring lipids. Now they're measuring all the subfractions and all the different particle sizes and particle numbers, and they think it's going to tell them the answer. But that's the same level of thinking. It's not going to give us the answer. We need a new level of thinking. And that level of thinking is exclusion zone water. And so exclusion zone water is this form or I guess, state of water that's been discovered by many different scientists over the years, and it has many different names because of that. They all discovered it at different times, so they called it structured water, fourth phase water, bound water, and there's a lot of really great books written about this. This one, I'll warn you, is quite difficult to get through. Lots of mathematical equations. It's difficult, but they're like Gerald Pollack's books are some of the best. They're the most easy to understand, and they're great. But also May Wan Ho's books, Living Rainbow H2O and The Rainbow and the Worm are great books to understand this. So what is exclusion zone water? Well, water has these unique properties in that when it holds energy and it gets next to a biological surface, it will cleave off one of the hydrogens, and you're left with an oxygen and a hydrogen. And those oxygens and hydrogens team up with other oxygens and hydrogens, and they form this lattice-like structure. And those structures can form like these planar surfaces that stack up on the hydrophilic surface. And this layer here is not liquid water, and it's not ice. It's more like a gel, like Jell-O, or you take the bone broth out of the fridge and it's gelatinous, or the consistency of raw egg white, that kind of texture. And from Dr. Pollack's book, he found that they've seen exclusion zones, this layer of water on the vascular endothelia. And so here it is here, depicted in an image. You can see the blood vessel wall. There's this layer, they call it this cell-free layer, because the red blood cells aren't there. Nothing's there. It's just this layer of easy exclusion zone water, and then the bloodstream's in the middle. And so here's a good depiction of it, although there's something wrong with this picture on the top, which you'll see in a minute. The authors didn't quite understand this. But here's the layer of endothelial cells, the glycocalyx, which is this brush border shag carpet thing on top of that, and this layer of structured water. And in this study here, which is Malcolm Kendrick's study, they say it's this anticoagulant gel layer on top of the glycocalyx. So we have to learn about some of the properties of structured water. One is that these planar surfaces don't line up exactly on top of each other like this. They kind of line up offset. And so because of that, there's a very small space here, and that's what allows it to be called exclusion zone water, because it pushes anything that's not it away from it. It keeps it away from it. And then from Dr. Pollack's book, he says that the protein albumin was excluded, which I thought was a weird thing to tag on to the end of a paragraph, but then I realized that that's the smallest protein in the blood. So he's just making a statement. This is the smallest thing in the blood, and even that is excluded. So if albumin is 3.8 nanometers in diameter, the red blood cell is way too big. If you have exclusion zone water there, it's not going to penetrate it. An LDL molecule is way too big. An HDL molecule, which is the smallest lipoprotein, is way too big. Even sodium ion is too big. And it turns out that the cutoff between what's too big and the only things that can penetrate it are these small hydrated ions of minerals. Sodium and potassium is the cutoff there. And nitrate ion can penetrate it, which makes sense because nitric oxide comes from endothelial cells. So it's this Hofmeister series of hydrated ions of minerals, and the cutoff's right there between sodium and potassium. And I want you to remember that for later when we talk about the COVID injections and the sodium potassium, if you know things about the sodium potassium distribution of ions in a cell. So you can see what's wrong with this picture, that these authors didn't understand. They're depicting something inside the structured water. And unless that's hydrated potassium ion, which I don't think it is, then it wouldn't be in there. And so it lines the lining of the blood vessel here, and all those positive hydrogens are in the middle, concentrated in the middle. So the other thing about structured water is that because the oxygen's a bigger molecule, and because they're all linked up together and they're synced, electricity can travel through them, electrons can travel through them. It's a very electronegatively charged area right here, and the hydrogens that are cleaved off make the area next to it a very positive, and they actually shown that a layer of hydrogens lines up next to it there, and so that's a positive next to a negative, which is a battery. That's why we have positive and negative ends on a battery. And so they've actually shown you can put electrodes into the negative and to the positive end and charge a light bulb. And so in this case, they've also found that you can put a tube of hydrophilic substance into a vat of water and shine radiant light on it, and the water starts to move through the tube with no pump acting on it whatsoever. And Dr. Pollack says that flow of this nature could persist indefinitely. Sustained water flow occurs inevitably in almost any scenario involving exclusion zones and radiant energy, which means infrared sunlight. I don't know if this is going to show up well for you guys, but you can see Ballister Rose was showing some of this. This is a video that a graduate student in Dr. Pollack's lab sent me. It settles down here in a minute, but it's basically that after the euthanation of a chick, they put infrared light, and you can see the blood still moving with no contracting heart. Now, the other thing is that structured water also forms on all biological surfaces, and that includes the elements of blood. Red blood cells, lipoproteins, they all form structured, or they should form structured water on them if we're doing the right things. And so that creates this layer of negative charge around the red blood cells or lipoproteins or anything in the blood called zeta potential is what they've called it. And so that creates this negative charge, and that's kind of attracted to the positive charge of the hydrogens, but if they get too close to each other, like charges don't like each other, so they stay evenly spaced. This prevents that coagulation, that erythrocyte sedimentation rate being things too readily clumping together. These are just studies showing that the zeta potential does occur on lipoproteins too, which, if you think about damaged lipoproteins, everybody wants to talk about, it's the oxidized ones. Well, they're lacking their structured water protection. So Virchow's triad in exclusion zone water. Easy water protects the artery lining. Easy water prevents hemodynamic changes by keeping blood flowing. And easy water prevents hypercoagulability by creating zeta potential on blood elements. So we've satisfied Virchow's triad. We can prevent clotting this way, right? However, easy is not impenetrable. It's not indestructible. It can be broken down. And Dr. Pollack calls it some electron-hungry process. And there are many words you could use to describe an electron-hungry process. You could say oxidative stress. You could say inflammation. I like to use the term low body charge, which basically means low structured water in your body, because structured water is what holds your negative charge. And if you have this low body charge, people like to attribute that to free radicals, which free radicals are not bad. They're signaling molecules, they're essential for life, but if we get too many of them, too many things that want to steal an electron, it can break down structured water, or we're not doing enough things to gain electrons. And so then the structured water can look something like this. It can get broken down, and the same things that broke down the structured water can now damage the artery. Or the red blood cells aren't evenly spaced like they're supposed to, and they start to clump together. And like I mentioned, you can measure how the small dense particles, if you have a high number of those, it's because your lipoproteins aren't protected. potentially by the structured water. So this is the extent of my PowerPoint skills. I just flipped the picture upside down to make a tube and used it many times. So we have endothelial cells, and then we have glycocalyx brush border, and then we have a lumen. It's probably not that convoluted, but this is what we got with this picture. So anyway, and then we also have a layer of structured water, that negatively charged structured water. And then we also have these red blood cells that have this zeta potential, that they're evenly spaced, and they're being moved through the bloodstream by the structured water. However, if we get into an inflammatory state, or we're not doing things that bring negative charge to our bodies, then we can get a breakdown of structured water in a certain spot, or lots of different spots. And then also that zeta potential can go away, and we can get red blood cells that are clumping together and being coagulative. And that can get pushed up into the lining of there where the structured water is not, and we can get a clotting response. Not to mention the damage to the lining of the artery that's being caused by the same things that damage the structured water. And so this happens most commonly in coronary arteries because they're under the most pressure of any arteries in the body. So when this situation happens, they're just getting pushed into it more forcefully. So we'll talk about, in my situation, if something like this had happened, with no atherosclerosis anywhere in my body, where did it happen? In the artery under the most pressure of any artery in the body, the left anterior descending artery. I don't think that's a coincidence. So do we need to do two things? We need to build structured water in the body, and we need to avoid things that damage it. So I talked about all the things that can damage it or interfere with the ability of the body to repair the artery after the damage has happened. And the best thing for building exclusion zone water is infrared light. That's what they found in Dr. Pollack's lab. Infrared, particularly the 3,000 nanometer wavelength, which is far infrared light, was the most structuring to water. You can see that it created a much bigger zone of EZ that excluded the things that were in the water in their lab than anything else. And this makes sense evolutionarily because about 40 to 50% of the sun's rays are infrared. So basically we are structured water batteries that are powered by the sun. But there's lots of other ways you can encourage or promote structured water formation in the body, like having the good water, the good raw material to actually make it. So we need spring water, glacial melt. So basically toxin-free water that's full of minerals and has been treated in some way that creates coherence or energizes the water, which can be vortexing, which is what the heart is. It could be sunlight exposure, it could be contact with the earth, something that creates that coherence in the water. We want to avoid toxins. In Dr. Pollack's lab, glyphosate has specifically been shown to break down structured water. I think it's 10 to 15%, but it might be 15 to 20. I'm not sure. I have to go back and look at that. But other toxins as well, interfere. They act as those free radicals that can break down structured water. Non-native EMFs, these electromagnetic fields, have also been shown in Dr. Pollack's lab to break down structured water 15 to 20%. They were using a wireless router in that experiment. Optimized circadian rhythm, that optimizes mitochondrial function, which people think, oh, mitochondria, they make ATP. People forget they're making water, and that water is perfect deuterium depleted structured water that they're making. Eating good fats, the animal fats, for many reasons, for good metabolism, but also DHA in the skin is what allows you to take sunlight and make electrons directly from it, which contributes to structured water. Grounding and earthing has been shown to increase zeta potential and increase blood flow, which we know means building structured water. And then infrared light exposure, so infrared sauna, sunrise and sunsets when infrared is highest. Exercise, especially to the point of creating heat. When you're creating heat, you're creating infrared light. We're all releasing light, we just can't see it because infrared's on the non-visible spectrum. Cold exposure also increases that body's ability to create heat. So you're, again, creating infrared light. And then positive loving relationships and expressing gratitude. Morisu Emoto's work shown us that you can express positive things to water and influence its ability to form perfect ice crystals, create coherence in water, where if you express negative things to it, it becomes fragmented when you make it into ice. So those emotions, very good for creating structured water. So what happened to me? My best guess is that, I'm heavily predisposed as a type 1 diabetic. I'm never going to have as normal blood sugars as someone who's not type 1. I was also pretty chronically dehydrated at the time, looking back. I convinced myself that you just need to drink when you're thirsty, and I wasn't hydrating with water or minerals at the time. I think I was oxalate dumping at the time, which I've had urinalysis my entire life as a type 1 diabetic, and I've never seen oxalates in my urine, but I looked the 9 months prior to the heart attack and there was oxalates in my urine. And I was on a very low oxalate diet, and I had been for about 2 years at the time. I think that oxalate dumping was a contributor. I went through a long period with higher stress. This was during COVID, and there were things happening in COVID that I didn't like, and I think I let it get to me a little bit. And then I had an acute stress about a day and a half before the heart attack, which was some stressful news about a close family member. And it wasn't just the news, it was the inability of me or my family to do anything about it. We were just waiting around hoping this person was going to be okay. So I think that contributed. And if any of you listened to Dr. Ballister-Rhodes' talk just a minute ago, this put me in a very incoherent state, I feel like. And so, the coherence of the heart and the biofield of the heart was probably very affected, which also interferes with blood flow, like he's talking about over there. And then, unwisely, I did a very intense workout the morning I had the heart attack. I probably should not have done that in that state of dehydration and stress, but I was trying to take my mind off of things. And my workouts at the time were like sprint up a hill, drop and do push-ups till you can't anymore, then do lunges till you can't anymore. It's probably a little too much. And then with all that in an already turbulent area of my coronary blood vessels, an LAD, I had a clot that formed because, again, that's the area under the most pressure. It's no mistake that I've talked to cardiothoracic surgeons and interventional cardiologists, and the most common place for a clot to happen like that is in a bend in the artery where we create turbulent flow, right? And a large enough clotting reaction happened despite there being no atherosclerosis that it blocked the entire artery. So what did I do? My diet stayed the same. Exercise slowly got back to being the same as soon as my leg was feeling better. My stress stayed about the same. And the only thing I did they recommended was take a blood thinner for 6 months because there was a stent in there. And I wanted to make sure that that stent had time to incorporate itself into the artery wall and not cause an issue. But after that, I stopped taking it. They wanted me on 5 medications the rest of my life. And I have to tell you the story. They wanted me on 2 blood pressure medications. In the hospital, I was like, okay, fine, I'll take one. And I took it one night. And, they wake you up 3 times in the hospital to check your blood pressure and your vitals and stuff. And I rolled over and I looked, and they're checking my blood pressure, and it says 90/50. And I was like, that's low. And so then, they left the room, and I was trying to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. It was hot in the room. So I sat up, and I couldn't sit up fast, like you would think. I got up slowly because I had all these wires attached to me. So I got up slowly, and I rubbed my eyes, and I stood up and almost passed out. I had to grab the wall, and so I went and turned the thermostat down and got back into bed. But that was just one. They wanted me on 2 blood pressure medications, and I decided just to take one. Anyways, my lipids also stayed the same, very elevated, because of the way I was eating and managing my type 1 diabetes. I did a lot of this, though. I did a lot of sauna, I did a lot of grounding, and I did a lot of sunlight. It's pretty much the only thing, and I did optimize the circadian rhythm. Those are pretty much the only things that really changed. I did take an enzyme called serapeptase for about a year. And this is, the relax sauna out there at the booth. That's the one that I used. And in about 3 months after the first echocardiogram that showed my ejection fraction was low, my ejection fraction was back to normal. And the signal of conduction through my heart tissue was only mildly hypokinetic. So almost back to normal, which I haven't gotten it tested since, and it's been almost 4 years. And then this was the original scan of the artery in my leg that was caused, the atherosclerosis that was caused by the device they used. You can see the narrowing. The blood's only getting through right there, 70 to 99% blockage. A year later, I got the same test. You can see there's still something there, but they said it was only 0 to 50% blocked at that time. And at that time, the vascular surgeon said, well, we can't say it's better because we don't see these things get better. And I was like, well, here it is. It's better. And I was like, maybe you don't see it get better with what you do, but what I did, are you not curious, And then a year after that, the artery was completely normal. And then just this past May, I got a second test, and it was still normal. So I don't know, if I stopped using these things, that device is still there. Maybe it would come back. I don't know, but I'm not going to find out. So again, this world tells us nothing about clotting, and it's a huge distraction from what the actual causes of heart disease really are, which I could argue it's a deficiency in infrared light and being removed from contact with the earth and in sunlight. But we're never going to change that model by resisting it. We're going to, well, Buckminster Fuller says you never change things by resisting the existing reality. To change something, you build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And I feel like, I read that and I was like, I kind of feel like that's what this model does. It makes the lipid model obsolete. Now, how do we take this information and understand some of the things that happen with COVID injections? Well, you know, the clotting thing seems pretty obvious, right? But we'll get into that. So structured water is also what's in cells, okay? So this is what gives the cells their negative charge. So the proteins in the cell, there's many of them, and there's evidence that water in the cell cytoplasm is never more than 0.5 nanometers from the proteins in the cell. And so most of the water in the cell is structured water. And so that's what creates this solute distribution of cells. We have potassium in the cells, sodium outside the cell, because that's the cutoff of what structured water does. But structured water is also negatively charged. So I remember learning in school, oh, the negative charge is created by the proteins or the chloride concentration in the cell, but really it's the structured water formation. It creates that negative charge. So the ATP is responsible for unfolding the proteins, which is why ATP is important. ATP is not the current energy currency of the cell, in my opinion. It's there so that it can unfold proteins to create more surface area, so more structured water forms on that surface area. Whereas if you get a protein that's bound up like this, that's less surface area than one that's been stretched out. And so then that allows the body to hold its negative charge of structured water, which is the structured water battery. That's our energy. So we have healthy mitochondrial function, making good ATP that unfold the proteins, make more surface area, all the water is next to those proteins in the cell, and we get structured water, and that gives us this happy medium of cells where we have the solute distribution and negatively charged cells. And this is a good depiction of it that I found reading a book. So we think about all the solutes in the cell just kind of floating around in water and cytoplasm, when in reality, there's structured water, a lot of it, on these proteins, and they kind of keep things grouped together here, like this. And then if the body, or if the cell needs to use them, we go through these phase transitions where the water temporarily becomes liquid again, and then things can move around, and then it goes back to structured water. And there's many things that can trigger a phase transition, temperature change, biochemical changes, things like that. But that's highlighted in Dr. Pollack's book, Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life, and how the phase transitions of water are what drive our biochemistry and drive our physiology. But it's more like this, where there's a lot more structured water in the body, or in the cells, making it more negatively charged. So remember the characteristics of easy water. It has exclusion properties. It holds a negative charge. It creates fluid flow, but also it's denser than water. So ice, when water becomes ice, we know that it's less dense, so it expands, right? And that's why ice floats. Well, when water becomes structured water, it actually becomes less dense. It becomes more concentrated, it becomes smaller, okay? So, ice is basically, we have liquid water, and ice is pretty much those water molecules stay the same. They just kind of get bound up together, frozen together, much in the same structure as structured water, but we have the whole water molecule there. Whereas easy water is just the hydrogen and oxygen, and one of the hydrogens has been cleaved off. And so it's this lattice-like structure, but it doesn't have the extra hydrogen on there, and that makes it more compact, less dense than water. So remember that. Now, some of the injection ingredients, or they were notorious for having what's called polyethylene glycol in them, and polysorbate 80. And polyethylene glycol and polysorbate 80 are two things that have been shown to create anaphylaxis, which we're going to explain here in a minute. But also they create very similar effects on the body. Okay. Now I was reading this book I told you about with all the mathematical equations from Gilbert Ling, and he talks all about how the water, or the cells, are full of structured water. And he did all these experiments and did different things, and he was injecting ethylene glycol into the cells. And what he found was that the inclusion of ethylene glycol, which is just one molecule of ethylene glycol, polyethylene glycol is just a string of ethylene glycols, caused first a shrinkage, followed by a return to normal and above normal weight as more and more ethylene glycol enters the cell. So as more and more ethylene glycol was entering the cell was here at this state. And at first it shrunk a little bit and then it expanded, right? So what's happening there? So the cell is structured water, it's becoming liquid water, and the cell is expanding. Because remember, structured water is more dense, smaller. And so when you put the ethylene glycol in there, it destroys the structured water and the cell expands, becomes bigger. Make sense? So that messes with our little happy cells, having the structured water and having the cellular distribution and things like that. So based on these experiments, and he mentioned this multiple times in his book, he did these experiments. Why, I don't know, he just mentioned it. But it shows us that ethylene glycol and polyethylene glycol very likely destroy structured water. And here is a study showing that many different types of polyethylene glycol destroy cell viability. They kill cells, okay? So you can see these forms down here kill them more readily than these here, but then they compared it to sorbitol, which is kind of a sugar, didn't really kill it that much or at all, and then just a little bit there. And so the type of polyethylene glycol used in the COVID injections, specifically AstraZeneca, was PEG 2000, which is not on the list there, which is interesting, but all the rest of these polyethylene glycols destroy the cells. So how does that help explain anaphylaxis, which is kind of an allergic reaction? Well, if you think about the pH scale, our cells are slightly alkaline, okay? So they hold that negative charge that gives them that alkalinity. And so that's because the cells hold the negative charge, and the pH of the cells is about 7.35 to 7.45. However, when we get a drop in cell voltage, like if we lose structured water, that is what's been shown, that drop in cell voltage creates mast cell instability, and mast cells start going crazy, which is a histamine response, an allergic response, right? And so that can happen locally at site of injection, or if it affects somebody systemically, we get anaphylaxis, which is a life-threatening allergic reaction. So it just depends on the amount that it affects somebody, but it explains that reaction. Clotting, very easy to explain based on all that we talked about. You destroy structured water in the body. Now we don't have good blood flow. We have hypercoagulability of blood elements. We don't have protection of the artery. It's very likely we're going to get heavy clotting. And they've shown that. There's been some crazy autopsies of pulling out major clots in people lately, which is, troublesome. High blood pressure. So if you have this structured water lining the artery like this, that's keeping blood moving, right? Keeping blood moving. You break down the structured water, it's not moving as well. So what does the artery do? What does the body do? It constricts the blood vessel, trying to move things faster. Just like if you put your thumb over a hose and the water comes out faster, right? The body's trying to constrict that, but that's increasing blood pressure. And if you have something in there that's destroying structured water that you can't keep it moving, it's going to stay constricted, increasing your blood pressure, trying to move the fluid. And then the big ones, myocarditis, pericarditis, and pleuritis, inflammation of the lungs, very established in the research now that these injections cause this. So it's interesting. So the reason, you ever taken a very cold ice cube out of the freezer and it sticks to your finger at first, right? And then as soon as it starts to melt, it's when it becomes slippery, right? It melts right off, and that's because as soon as it starts to melt, what happens is next to the ice, a layer of structured water, or the hydrogens, layer of structured water forms on the ice, and then the hydrogens on top of that create an almost frictionless surface. And that's why you can ice skate like this. Even though this is not a hydrophilic surface, the ice is, and so as the water melts, you can slide right off, right? So structured water removes friction and creates this very slippery surface. And it says it here in one of Dr. Pollack's books that he edited. Extracellular matrix is the best example. So extracellular matrix is fluid outside of the cell. The solid part of the gel both constitutes a physical barrier separating organisms into tissue and compartments and plays a major role in cell adhesion. So this exists between cells and between tissues, different organs and things. So in cardiac cells, they're muscle cells that are kind of joined up like this. They have these little bands that bound them together, so they're kind of bound together, and they form like these striations like this. And so in between those cells, there's structured water, right? Or supposed to be anyways. And that creates this friction, because as the heart's contracting, the muscles expanding, contracting like this, it's moving. If you remove that structured water from there, then it's contracting like this, and we've lost this frictionless thing. All of a sudden we create friction, myocarditis, okay? Also, the pericardium, which is this kind of connective tissue sheath that goes around the heart, well, guess what the heart's doing? It's moving, it's contracting, right? If you remove the structured water from the pericardium next to the heart, all of a sudden that frictionless, that thing that protects you against friction is gone, the heart's moving, we get pericarditis, right? Same with the lungs. It's no coincidence that the organs that are moving, because you're breathing in the lungs, are the ones that develop these inflammations when you remove structured water. More so in the heart, because it's moving more and more aggressively than the lungs. And then cancer, we've definitely seen studies coming out, and even oncologists saying, I've never seen this rise in cancer before. And so when you look at this, the signal for cell division happens from a phase transition. So basically when the cell loses its structured water, it goes into that phase transition and becomes water temporarily. Things can happen and then it comes back to structured water. And that's a very controlled thing that happens. However, if you get something in there that restores structured water and you lose the voltage of the cell, that loss of voltage of a cell triggers cell division, right? And that, if it happens in a controlled way, that's great. That's a good thing. The cells are dividing, we're making new cells. If it happens in an uncontrolled way, because there's polyethylene glycol in there destroying structured water, then it gets the constant signal to divide. And we can get these turbo cancers that people are talking about. And this is from Otto Warburg. And he talks about how in cancer cells they lose their structure after they lose respiration, which is this metabolic theory of cancer, things like that. They lose their structure. Why? Because they're losing their structured water. And instead of being this compact, nice cell that's less dense than water, it becomes expanding and amorphous because there's more fluid water in there. So what can we do to heal, knowing all this? Well, we can do all these things I talked about to create structured water. This is what I talked about last night with in the panel. We need to increase the charge of our bodies first before we can get rid of things. We have to increase this structured water battery first, and that's putting our body in this environment. Putting your body in an environment that allows you to gain electrons and build structured water, removing the things that steal it or break it down. And then we need to open up detoxification pathways. So avoid toxin exposure, sweat, and then keep elimination pathways open. So support your liver, make sure lymph is flowing by movement and various types of body work, but also regulating circadian rhythm, which we're going to talk about, and making sure your bowels are moving. All this stuff needs to happen so that as we charge up the body, we can get rid of the toxins. And I know, a few different people who tried every supplement in the world with their vaccine injury, and nothing worked until they started doing these things and then regulating their circadian rhythm. And this is really important, and I've learned about this more and more recently in the last 2.5 years. So when the daylight comes, we're supposed to get this spike in cortisol. And so the blue light tells your body to wake up, have a cortisol response. And then that cortisol wanes throughout the day as sunlight goes away. And then when blue light goes away, which is supposed to go away after sunset, we get melatonin production. And that melatonin it produces in the response to a darkness signal. So this artificial light after sunset is completely destroying that signaling, and we're not getting enough melatonin production. And the reason that that's a problem is because melatonin not only tells you to go to sleep, but it also triggers for deep restorative cleansing sleep, that deep REM sleep that we want. So it triggers mitophagy and autophagy. So if we have cells that are not functioning properly, that are moving toward cancerous, we want to kill those cells off and build new healthy ones. And that process is triggered by melatonin and deep restorative sleep. Lymphatic drainage and lymphatic drainage, which is lymphatic in the brain drainage, gut renewal repair, and then relevant to what we talked about, arterial health is very important as well, because arterial lining repairs at night when we sleep. So if our sleep is not optimized, it just doesn't mean you're just asleep, and that's great. It means you have enough melatonin to trigger that deep restorative sleep. And I wouldn't advise taking melatonin, because then that shuts down your body's process of making it itself. And the process of making it is almost just as important as the molecule itself. Same with vitamin D. So we have to block the blue light. And so to optimize the circadian rhythm, you want to see sunrise, make that the first light you see before any other artificial light. If you can, get mid-morning light, because how much UVA light you get in mid-morning dictates how much serotonin you'll make, and the serotonin is made into melatonin when you block blue light later. So that your good night's sleep and your restorative sleep starts in the morning. Get adequate sunlight throughout the day. Tell your body it's daytime. The indoor lighting is not bright enough to really tell your body it's daytime. The sunlight is what tells your body it's daytime. And then most importantly, block the blue light after sunset. That's critical. Keep the lighting low, use incandescent bulbs, limit screen time, wear blue blocking glasses, the orange or the red pair to increase your melatonin. And you'll see so many other benefits as well. But that's all I have. So just kind of a little plugs here. This is my website, resourceforhealth.com. On my website, I have courses where I talk all about the heart and heart disease. Not just the vascular system, but heart failure and heart attacks and all kinds of things, and circadian rhythm. I also do health consulting from a distance, online health consulting, and that's through my website. I just started a health community, and it's only $20 a month. You can be part of that community and ask me questions, and there's resources in there as well, circadian rhythm guides, diet guides, and then my books are available on Amazon, and this book is actually available at the Chelsea Green booth. It's published by Chelsea Green, so they're over there. They got copies of it in there, and I'm going to be hanging out by that booth if I can today. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed it.
We do have about 15 minutes for questions. If you want to line up here and make sure you keep the background chatter to a minimum or not at all so that the questions can be picked up on the recording.
Just have a simple question. What do you think about deuterium depleted water?
Think about what?
Deuterium depleted water.
I think that it's a good thing, obviously. It's not that we need to drink deuterium depleted water, like specifically that you buy. I think that that's kind of an extra cost for people. But deuterium does clog up the mitochondria and interfere with ATP production, which is, then affecting the ability of the proteins to unstructure and create structured water in healthy cells. So it is an issue. Deuterium is an issue. You're never going to avoid it totally. But I don't think people necessarily need to buy, from a company deuterium depleted water. So deuterium depletion happens with sunlight exposure, which makes sense that the most high deuterium foods are typically only available when the sun is around in summer. So like fruit is a big deuterium bomb, grains are a big deuterium bomb, and generally those are only available in season, which makes sense because we have more sunlight. And then water from springs higher in mountains is way less deuterium than springs that are closer to the ocean. Glacial melt would be the lowest in deuterium. But like I use Mountain Valley because it comes from mountains in Arkansas, whereas other sources like the ones from Italy, they may be closer to the coast and things like that. So just, but things to think about. Unless you have the money and you want to buy deuterium depleted water, go for it. Otherwise, people don't need to. They just have to be conscious of those other things. Yeah.
Great research and presentation. Thank you. What is your opinion on consuming alkaline water? Will that discourage the body's natural production of easy water, or what do you think?
I don't think so. To me, alkaline water just means that it's full of minerals. It has those minerals charged to it. And then if the water's full of toxins, it could be more acidic, that kind of thing. So I think that that's the difference in alkaline water, but I don't think that alkaline water is going to interfere with easy water production. It's kind of a different thing. If you've got toxin-free, mineral-rich, energized water, it's going to structure itself. And so drinking the water is important. You need enough for the raw material, and you need to be toxin-free. But when you put the water in you, you can then also treat your body to structure the water. So that's getting the sunlight, the grounding, give your body the energy to structure the water that's already in there. So I have no problem with alkalized water. As long as water is toxin-free, mineral-rich, and energized, that's all you need.
infrared sauna or a red light panel better, or they both?
I mean, they're both beneficial. Like all the frequencies and colors of natural light from the sun do some amount of structuring to water. It's just that infrared light was the best by far infrared, which is why I like that sauna out there, because it has the most far infrared emittance from their heaters. So if I'm looking to get a concentrated dose, that would be the one I recommend. I'm not saying that there's not other good sauna companies out there. There's plenty of good ones. That's why I chose that one. But yeah, so far infrared is the best. But infrared, red light will do it. They're all beneficial. Just keep in mind that, you know, an infrared sauna is in a way processed light. Just like blue light is processed light. You know, the LED bulbs are really high in blue. The reason that infrared sauna and red light panels, the studies show that they're so beneficial is because we're so deficient in those wavelengths, right? So if we get more of those, I think there would be a threshold. And you see this with red light therapy lasers. There's a threshold where it's beneficial and then it starts to be negative, right? So you don't want to overdo them, and sunlight is always best, but they are very useful tools, and obviously I used one to boost your red and infrared, especially in winter when it's harder to get them. But just keep in mind there's a threshold.
And also, when you're structuring water, are you structuring it, or are you just energizing it and coherencing the water?
Right, so there seems to be like terminology issues. People say different things. Like, I think it would be impossible to drink structured water because it would be in a gel. Yeah, it'd be like trying to, like when the bone broth comes out of the fridge, you know, and it's July, it'd be like, you know? I think that, but I don't know, we should ask Dr. Pollack. I think, yes, when we're treating the water, we're energizing it or creating coherence in the water so that when it gets next to biological surfaces, it more readily structures itself and becomes that easy water. That's how I term it, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great presentation, thank you. Question about the cholesterol hypothesis and clotting, and I know that wasn't the theme of your talk. So the lean mass hyperresponders, and I have patients in my practice that are utilizing the carnivore diet. Some of them go up to crazy levels, others no response whatsoever. Obviously, I'm guessing you were doing something like that with your diet, which is maybe perhaps why your numbers were so high. What are your thoughts on that? You know, does anything need to be done about it? Do you just ignore it? How do you handle folks that have these responses?
I mean, personally, I largely ignore it. I mean, you know, there's more and more evidence or more and more research coming out about lean mass hyperresponders. It's kind of this new thing that's been discovered that's probably always been there. I also know that the context of this lipid hypothesis, you know, what we determined lipids should be was in a population of people eating processed food diets, eating carbohydrates. So they were likely had LDL levels that were generally lower, right? And then we had this subset of people who go on low carb diets now, because it's a thing now, and we're seeing elevations in LDL, and I think that has to do with energy, just energy delivery. But why does it not happen? Why does it happen to some people and not other people? And I think that has to do with hormone imbalances, because hormone imbalances are driven by light and the wrong light environment. I have a theory, I don't know, I have never tested this, but I have a theory that if the hormone environments were right, everybody would be a lean mass hyperresponder. Some people more than others. Like I'm a pretty significant one technically, even though like the hardcore lean mass hyperresponders would tell me that my HDL is too low, my trigs are too high, that, you know, I can't be a lean mass hyperresponder. But when I go low carb, it happens. So I think that trying to analyze lipids and determine something from them other than metabolism is a mistake. I think that it's a distraction from what you should actually be doing to protect your arteries. And I'm just an N of 1 experiment, but I completely reversed plaque in arteries with LDL levels well above what's normal, quote unquote normal. I did it because light and energizing your body is way more important than paying attention to those things. And then the other thing is that most people are chronic circadian rhythm disrupted, which is messing with leptin resistance or messing with the hormone leptin and insulin resistance. That's the main driver in my opinion. And so those are hormones of metabolism. So if the metabolism is off like that and you go on low carb and things go up or they stay down, like if that metabolism was regulated, would it do the same thing? I don't know. We don't know the answer to that. All I know is that if you look at all the studies and people with FH, genetically high cholesterol, lean mass hyperresponders, the new studies are coming out, it's irrelevant. What the LDL is, what the ApoB is, what the small dense particles are, it seems to be irrelevant to development of plaque.
And by that argument, is blood pressure also perhaps irrelevant?
I don't know
Because of
that
the
that's
same
irrelevant. I
potential?
mean, blood pressure would be more of an indication of like leptin or insulin resistance, in my opinion, or chronic stress, things like that. But I don't think that blood pressure is what's causing adverse events. Like, it's the things that are causing the high blood pressure that are causing the adverse events. Because people say like, you know, in people with high blood pressure, there's more pressure. There's things that are, you're more at risk for a stroke or a heart attack or whatever. I'm just like, well, I don't think you tell someone with high blood pressure not to exercise. And that definitely increases blood pressure more, but we don't tell them that. You know, it's not like this inherently dangerous thing. It's just that it's associated with strokes and heart attacks. Why? Because high blood pressure, the things that cause it in the first place, those are the things that cause strokes and heart attacks. So I also know that what, you know, they called normal blood pressure originally was higher than what it is today. And you'll never guess what caused the lowering of that recommendation. Sponsored from pharmaceutical companies, right? They wanted to lower it. So what is high blood pressure? I don't know. You know, like the body is supposed to change. It's supposed to adapt. We're obsessed with having numbers of this level here. When in reality, changing and adapting, responding to your environment, that's health, right? If you can't adapt to the environment, that's a problem.
How's it going? So when I was 19 during the pandemic, I got the shot, and I had perimyocarditis and a blood clot in my whole entire left leg. Was on Lovenox for 6 months, and then switched on to another blood thinner. Should I repeat what is it? So when I was 19, I got the shot, and two weeks later, I ended up having a blood clot in my left leg, perimyocarditis, and you know, went through all of that stuff, and I kind of got into all of this because of that, and I just wanted to. I was an athlete at the time, hockey player. And I wanted to ask about, like, you know, your fitness journey with, you know, working out and you know, having all these problems. Because sometimes I feel like even now that I may overdo it, and I don't know where to ride the fine line, but I pretty much do exactly what you said to, you know, help with all of this with, you know, diet, saunas, grounding, everything like that. So I'm glad that I'm doing all of what I should do, but I feel like sometimes I may be hindering it, and I want to make sure I'm doing what's best for myself.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's tough, and unfortunately these things have happened, but, you know, kudos to you for, you know, not just saying, oh, it happened to me, nothing I can do about it. Like, you're taking action. That's awesome. And I would say that, like, I'd say that too much exercise, like I did, in specific situations could be an issue. There's also evidence that type 1s they handle the stress of an intense workout poorly, especially if it's been a long time of type 1. So that could have led to more incoherence whatsoever. And I won't lie, like, an intense workout, it doesn't scare me anymore, but I'm kind of like, do I need to, you know, like, and I don't know, I think it was a straw that broke the camel's back in my situation. So I don't think it was the cause. An intense workout and exercise is good for us, but I don't think marathons are good for us. I don't think that Ironmans are great for us, that kind of thing. So there is such a thing as too much. And I think that I used to have a strength coach who I'd walk into the weight room and he'd say, instead of like, we have these plans for the year of what we're supposed to lift and like reach our goals or whatever, and he would say, don't pay attention to the plan. Like, that's the outline. He's like, what can you lift today based on how you're feeling? Did you break up with your girlfriend? Okay, you're probably not going to lift that much today. Let's drop it down. Because, you know, he would say like, you know, the best workout at a bad time is going to be worse than a workout of any sort at a good time, you know, like that kind of thing. So just be smart, you know, like if you're in a state where you're feeling stressed or you've been traveling a lot and you just don't feel like you've been taking care of yourself as well, then don't be super aggressive with exercise. And then wait for those times where you're feeling good to push yourself a little bit.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful, because that's in the back of my mind sometimes when I'm working out, I will think about it a little too much. And I'm like, oh, am I hurting myself or am I helping myself? So,
Yeah, there was definitely a mental game with me for like a year after the heart attack. It wasn't just the exercise thing. It was, I'd travel somewhere and be like, okay, where's the closest hospital? In my head, that's what I'm thinking. And I don't do that anymore, but it was a while. Or there was like, I never took baby aspirin consistently, but I had it in my bag, and just having it in my bag was like, okay, I feel better about that, even though I never took it. It was just kind of this mental thing that I had to go through.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Hi there, thank you. Quick question, is there a certain amount of vitamins, or I guess I should say, what kind of vitamins do you take?
I don't take any supplements other than Redmond Relight. I take electrolytes. That's pretty much it. When I had the heart attack and part of the healing journey, like I said, I took serrapeptase, which is an enzyme that breaks down clotting tissue, for about a year, but then I stopped taking that. I also took, maybe for about 6 months, I took taurine, which is an amino acid we find in animal foods. But I took that because of its effects on endothelial health. So I was trying to create, better endothelial health. But that's what I took then. And yeah, I don't really take supplements. Sometimes I'll take methylene blue, which just like before I fly, I'll take it just because of the EMF environment and changing time zones. Just kind of support the increase in oxidative stress that probably is created from that. But other than that, I try and get all my nutrients from food. And I am pretty strict about my diet. I get all my fat-soluble vitamins. I get all my minerals, and I boost my minerals with the Relight. I think I think there's an inherent intelligence to gaining nutrients from foods, and that's where I try and get them.
Okay, and one more quick question. So I do a 5K every day, but I just walk it. Is that important to sweat? Do I need to be sweating?
She does a 5K every day, and she's asking if that's important and for sweating or whatever. Yeah, sweating is important. Yes, it's obviously a natural process. It's one of our main detox processes. And it takes stress off the liver because you sweat it right out of the skin. So I'm a huge fan of sweating. However, you need to replace fluid and electrolytes the more you sweat. So I sweat a ton in the sauna. So I take a lot of Redmond Relight on days I use the sauna because you need to replace that. Dehydration, this is a hydraulic fluid system that we're dealing with, and lack of fluid in the system could definitely predispose us to clotting. In my case, I think that was one of the main contributors. So replacing those fluids is really important, but sweating, yes, huge benefit.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's it. Thanks, guys.